Some mothers become blessings. Others become burdens. My daughter-in-law said into the church microphone on Mother's Day, while more than 200 people sat smiling beneath stained glass windows and white flower arrangements, pretending they didn't understand exactly who she was talking about. Then Nicole Carter turned her head slowly and looked directly at me from the front of the sanctuary, while the entire room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the soft hum of the ceiling fans above the pews. My son Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. I sat there with my white gloves folded neatly in my lap and forced myself to smile, while my chest tightened so hard it felt difficult to breathe. I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end. And tell me where you're watching from, because sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the same people we once loved enough to sacrifice everything for. The church smelled faintly of lilies and olden books that morning. Sunlight streamed through the colored windows, painting soft patches of blue and gold across the carpet near the altar. Mother's Day had always been important to me. Even after my husband Thomas passed away 3 years earlier, I still pressed my dresses the night before church and pinned fresh flowers onto my coat the way he used to like. That morning I chose a navy dress with pearl buttons and low heels that pinched slightly at the toes. I spent nearly 40 minutes curling my silver hair because Sophie, my granddaughter, once told me I looked elegant when I wore it that way. I should have known something was wrong the moment I arrived. Nicole barely greeted me in the church lobby. She air-kissed my cheek without warmth before turning back toward a group of women from the church committee. Daniel stood nearby holding a tray of pastries and coffee cups, but even he seemed nervous, distracted. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," he said quickly without meeting my eyes. Then he walked away before I could answer. I remember standing there beside the welcome table feeling strangely invisible while families hugged each other around me. Children carried roses down the aisles. Elderly couples sat arm in arm inside polished wooden pews. Everyone seemed wrapped inside their own little world of love and tradition, while I stood alone, holding the small white carnation the church handed out to mothers at the door. The service itself began normally enough. Pastor Benjamin spoke about grace and sacrifice. The choir sang, "Great is thy faithfulness." Nicole sat in the front row beside Daniel wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Her blonde hair rested perfectly against her shoulders, every strand carefully arranged. People loved Nicole at church. She organized food drives, chaired charity luncheons, and always knew exactly when to place a sympathetic hand on someone's shoulder. She had mastered the art of looking kind in public. Halfway through the service, Pastor Benjamin announced there would be a special tribute to mothers in the congregation. Nicole volunteered to speak. I watched her walk confidently toward the podium in high heels that clicked softly against the church floor, while several women smiled admiringly at her from nearby pews. Mothers shape the emotional health of a family. She began smoothly into the microphone. Some mothers create peace. Some create stress. Some know when to support their children, and others refuse to let go. A few nervous chuckles floated through the sanctuary. My stomach tightened immediately. Nicole paused for effect before smiling sadly, like someone carrying a heavy burden of her own. "And sometimes," she continued gently, "families must learn how to carry difficult people with compassion, even when those people become burdens themselves." This time the silence felt immediate, heavy, deliberate. I noticed several heads slowly turning toward me. An older woman across the aisle looked down awkwardly into her lap. Someone near the back coughed quietly. Nicole kept speaking in that calm, practiced voice, but I no longer heard the words clearly because all I could focus on was Daniel sitting there motionless beside her with his hands clasped together while he stared at the floor like a child pretending not to hear an argument between adults. My fingers tightened around the carnation stem until one of the tiny white petals fell silently into my lap. And in that moment, sitting alone in a church where I had prayed beside my family for nearly 30 years, I realized something far worse than humiliation. This hadn't been spontaneous. Nicole had planned this. And somehow, everyone else already knew. The service ended 10 minutes later, but nobody approached me when the congregation slowly began filing out of the sanctuary. Usually on Mother's Day, women from the church stopped to compliment my dress or ask about my flower arrangements for the spring fundraiser. Children hugged their grandmothers near the stained glass windows while families gathered in clusters across the lobby, taking photographs beneath the large wooden cross by the entrance. That morning it felt as if an invisible wall had appeared around me. People smiled politely from a distance, then quickly turned away. I remained seated in the third pew from the back long after the choir stopped singing, because I suddenly felt afraid to stand up. The white carnation still rested in my lap beside the crumpled church bulletin. One of the petals had fallen onto my coat sleeve without me noticing. I brushed it away carefully with trembling fingers. Nicole stood near the front doors surrounded by members of the women's ministry, accepting compliments the way beauty queens accept flowers after a pageant. I watched her tilt her head sympathetically while speaking to an older couple from the church board. Every few seconds, she glanced toward me with an expression that almost looked concerned. That was what made it so cruel. Not the words themselves, the performance of kindness around them. Daniel eventually walked toward me, though even then he hesitated halfway down the aisle, as if approaching me required effort. "You ready to go, Mom?" he asked quietly. I looked up at him for several seconds before answering. He looked tired, older than 43. The dark circles beneath his eyes reminded me of the nights he used to stay awake studying for engineering exams at our kitchen table while I made him coffee after midnight. Back then he used to call me his best friend. "Did you know she was going to say that?" I asked softly. Daniel adjusted the sleeve of his suit jacket and glanced toward the church lobby before responding. "Nicole did not mean it personally," he said finally. "She was speaking generally about family dynamics." Family dynamics. I repeated those words silently in my mind while staring at the son I once carried on my hip through grocery stores and school parking lots. "She looked directly at me," I said. Daniel sighed under his breath the way exhausted people do when they believe someone else is becoming difficult. "Mom, maybe you are reading too much into it." That sentence hurt more than Nicole's speech. Because Nicole owed me nothing. But Daniel owed me the truth. I stood slowly from the pew, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress with unsteady hands. The sanctuary had nearly emptied now except for a few volunteers collecting programs near the altar. Somewhere in the distance I could hear children laughing outside beside the church fountain. "I think I will drive myself home," I told him. Daniel looked relieved so quickly that he probably did not realize his face changed. "All right," he said. "We are heading to brunch with Nicole's family anyway. Sophie has been excited about it all week." I blinked at him. "Brunch?" He nodded once. "Nicole told me she mentioned it to you." She had not. Of course she had not. Another tiny exclusion hidden beneath layers of plausible deniability. Another empty seat waiting somewhere without my name attached to it. Daniel kissed my cheek distractedly before walking away toward the lobby where Nicole stood laughing beside a floral arrangement taller than she was. I watched Sophie run into his arms moments later wearing a pale pink dress and shiny white shoes. She looked over his shoulder and spotted me standing alone near the pews. For a brief second she smiled and lifted her hand in a tiny wave. Then Nicole placed a hand gently against Sophie's shoulder and guided her toward the exit without looking back. I remained inside the sanctuary after everyone else left. The church suddenly felt enormous without voices filling it. Sunlight stretched across the empty pews in long golden stripes, while somewhere above me the organist practiced softly for the afternoon service. I sat back down slowly and stared at the front of the church where Nicole had stood with the microphone only minutes earlier. That was when I noticed something folded neatly beside the aisle on the pew ahead of me. A printed program for the Mother's Day brunch. Nicole's handwriting covered the front in elegant gold ink. Family table seating. Beneath the list of names was Daniel, Nicole, Sophie, Nicole's parents, Nicole's sister and brother-in-law. There was no place card for me. I drove home alone with the Mother's Day brunch program sitting face down on the passenger seat beside my purse the entire way home. The late morning traffic moved slowly through downtown Maplewood, while church bells echoed faintly somewhere behind me. Families crossed sidewalks carrying flower bouquets and bakery boxes. Restaurants overflowed with reservations and smiling grandchildren taking photographs beside their mothers and grandmothers. At every stoplight, I caught glimpses of people celebrating each other while I sat gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached beneath my gloves. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it always had. White shutters, brick walkway, blue hydrangeas blooming beneath the front windows. Thomas planted those hydrangeas himself nearly 20 years ago because he said they reminded him of the flowers outside the small, in where we spent our honeymoon in Vermont. He used to kneel in the dirt every spring, trimming them carefully, while Daniel followed him around the yard, carrying a little green watering can almost bigger than his own body. I sat in the driveway for nearly 5 minutes before going inside because suddenly the silence waiting for me behind the front door felt unbearable. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the coffee cake I baked the night before. I had planned to bring it to brunch. Nicole always claimed Sophie loved my cinnamon coffee cake, even though Nicole herself never touched sugar. I placed the untouched cake container slowly onto the counter and stared at it for a long moment before removing my gloves. The house felt colder than usual despite the warm weather outside. I walked into the living room and noticed the framed family photograph from last Thanksgiving still sitting on the fireplace mantel. Daniel stood behind Nicole with one hand resting proudly on Sophie's shoulder, while I sat at the edge of the sofa, smiling toward the camera. At the time, I believed we still looked like a family. Now I noticed something different. Nicole positioned herself exactly in the center, while I sat slightly apart from everyone else near the armrest. Small details reveal the truth long before words do. I made tea out of habit more than desire. The kettle whistled softly while I stood staring through the kitchen window into the backyard where Thomas once built Sophie a wooden swing set. For years, I babysat Sophie every Wednesday afternoon while Daniel and Nicole worked late. I packed her lunches, helped with homework, sat through elementary school recitals where she searched for my face in crowded auditoriums before walking on stage. Nicole used to call me her lifesaver back then. I do not know what we would do without you, Evelyn, she once told me while handing me Sophie's diaper bag and car seat in the same breath. Funny how quickly sacrifice becomes invisible once people no longer need it. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. For one foolish second, I thought it might be Daniel apologizing. Instead, it was a social media notification from Nicole. I should have ignored it. Instead, I opened the app and immediately felt my stomach drop. Nicole had already posted photographs from brunch. There she stood smiling beside her parents beneath a giant arrangement of pink roses inside the country club dining room. Daniel held Sophie in his lap, while everyone raised champagne glasses toward the camera. Another photo showed the women seated together beneath a banner that read celebrating the mothers who hold families together. I stared at the image until my vision blurred slightly. There were 7 place settings visible at the table. 7 linen napkins. 7 crystal water glasses. No empty chair. No missing plate. Not even evidence that another guest had ever been expected. Then I noticed Nicole's caption beneath the photographs. So grateful for healthy boundaries, peaceful homes, and the people who protect them. More than 60 church members had already liked the post. Several women from church commented heart emojis and prayers beneath it. One message from a woman named Carol Jennings made my chest tighten instantly. You are such a strong daughter-in-law, Nicole. Not everyone could handle that situation with so much grace. That situation, as though I were no longer a person. Just a burden people discussed quietly over brunch and prayer circles. I set the phone down slowly beside my untouched cup of tea. Then I looked around the kitchen where I had spent decades cooking birthday dinners, Christmas meals, and Sunday breakfasts for the same family, now carefully erasing me one polite smile at a time. And for the first time since Thomas died, I began wondering if Nicole's speech at church had not been humiliation at all. Maybe it was preparation. Maybe they wanted everyone to believe I was becoming difficult long before they made whatever move came next. The next few days unfolded with a strange kind of politeness that only made everything feel worse. Nobody argued with me directly. Nobody raised their voice. Instead, people simply began speaking around me instead of to me. By Tuesday afternoon, I noticed I had stopped receiving notifications from the family group chat Daniel created years ago. At first, I assumed my phone was malfunctioning until Sophie accidentally mentioned a restaurant they were all planning to visit that weekend. Dad said Uncle Mark wants the patio table because the weather is supposed to be nice, she said casually while sitting at my kitchen island eating crackers after school. Then she froze with one cracker halfway to her mouth. Oh, she whispered softly. I thought you knew. I smiled anyway and handed her another napkin. I must have missed the message, I told her gently. Sophie looked uncomfortable after that. Children always sense tension faster than adults realize. She kept glancing toward the front window every few minutes, as though afraid Nicole might appear suddenly and discover she had said too much. When Nicole arrived to pick her up an hour later, she barely stepped inside the house. Sorry we are rushing today, she said while adjusting the strap of her designer handbag. We have a dinner reservation. I nodded calmly. Sophie mentioned that. Nicole's expression changed for only half a second before the smile returned. Oh good. I was worried nobody told you. Nobody told you. The words lingered in my kitchen long after they left. That evening I opened social media again despite knowing I should not. Another family photograph appeared on Nicole's page. Daniel stood beside his cousins around a long restaurant table, while Sophie grinned between her grandparents from Nicole's side of the family. Beneath the photo Nicole had written, "Protecting peace sometimes means creating healthy distance." Hundreds of people from church followed Nicole online. She understood exactly what she was doing. Every caption sounded harmless unless someone knew the truth hiding beneath it. Every smiling photograph quietly suggested I was unstable, dramatic, or difficult behind closed doors. The realization settled over me slowly like cold rain. Nicole was not simply excluding me. She was rewriting me. By Thursday afternoon, I found another small change inside my own home. Daniel stopped by unexpectedly while I was folding laundry in the upstairs hallway. He stood awkwardly near the linen closet with his car keys in one hand and his phone in the other. "Mom, have you seen the property tax paperwork recently?" he asked casually. The question itself was harmless. The tone underneath it was not. I looked at him carefully before answering. "I keep everything in the office drawer downstairs." Daniel nodded but did not leave immediately. Instead, he followed me downstairs and watched while I unlocked the small oak filing cabinet Thomas bought nearly 15 years earlier. "You really should let somebody help organize all this," he said while flipping through folders. "It gets harder to manage these things alone at your age." At your age? Another phrase people use when they are trying to reduce a person. Slowly enough that nobody notices. I closed the drawer gently. "I have managed this household since before you learned how to tie your shoes," I reminded him softly. Daniel gave a strained laugh. "Nicole is just worried about you, Mom." There it was again. Concern disguised as control. I stared at my son standing inside the office Thomas once used for accounting work every Sunday evening while jazz records played softly downstairs. Daniel used to sit on the floor beside his father coloring pictures while Thomas balanced checkbooks at the desk. We built this life one careful payment at a time. Thomas worked extra shifts at the hardware store. I sewed curtains for neighbors during the holidays to help cover Daniel's private school tuition. When Daniel wanted to attend engineering college out of state, I sold my mother's diamond bracelet to help pay the first year of housing fees. Nicole knew all of this. She cried when I told her those stories after she married Daniel. "I hope I can become half the mother you are someday," she once said while sitting at this exact kitchen table drinking hot chocolate during her pregnancy with Sophie. Now she was carefully teaching the world to see me as a burden instead. After Daniel left that afternoon, I noticed something sitting on the front porch near the mailbox. It was a white envelope addressed in elegant handwriting. Inside was a printed invitation from the Church Women's Committee announcing a senior support seminar titled Planning Healthy Transitions for Aging Family Members. My name had already been highlighted in yellow marker. For the next 2 days, the invitation remained unopened on my kitchen counter beside the fruit bowl and unpaid water bill. Every time I walked past it, the highlighted yellow line seemed brighter somehow, almost accusatory. Planning healthy transitions for aging family members. The phrase itself sounded harmless enough. Thoughtful even. But after everything that had happened since Mother's Day, I no longer believed in harmless coincidences. By Saturday morning, the silence inside my house had become unbearable, so I decided to drive into town just to be around other people for a while. Maplewood was crowded with weekend shoppers carrying iced coffees and grocery bags beneath rows of American flags hanging from storefronts. I wandered slowly through the farmer's market without buying much, pretending to compare tomatoes and fresh peaches while mostly trying not to think about Nicole's social media posts or Daniel's careful questions about my paperwork. Around noon, I stopped at a small diner near the edge of downtown called Harper's Grill. Thomas and I used to eat there after church sometimes before he passed away. The booths were old and the coffee was never strong enough, but the waitresses still remembered customers by name, which mattered more these days than people realized. I had just finished stirring cream into my coffee when I heard someone say my name softly from behind me. "Evelyn." I looked up to see Pastor Benjamin standing near my booth with his suit jacket folded over one arm. He looked uncomfortable in a way I had never seen before. "Mind if I sit for a moment?" he asked quietly. Something in his expression immediately tightened my stomach. I nodded toward the empty seat across from me. Pastor Benjamin ordered black coffee, but barely touched it after the waitress walked away. Instead, he rested both hands around the mug and stared down at the steam rising from it for several seconds before finally speaking. I have been debating whether this conversation is appropriate, he admitted carefully. But after Sunday, I do not believe remaining silent would be the right thing either. My chest felt suddenly cold despite the warmth inside the diner. What conversation? I asked softly. Pastor Benjamin sighed heavily and lowered his voice. Nicole approached several members of the church board about 3 weeks ago. I felt my fingers tighten around the coffee cup. About me? He nodded once. She expressed concern regarding your ability to continue living independently. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen sounded strangely distant while I stared across the table at the pastor's tired face. She said you had become forgetful, he continued gently. Confused at times. Emotionally unstable. Since Thomas passed. Emotionally unstable. I repeated the words silently in my mind while remembering Nicole laughing in my kitchen years earlier while I braided Sophie's hair before preschool. There was discussion about possibly helping transition you into an assisted living community, Pastor Benjamin added carefully. Nicole claimed the house was becoming too much responsibility for you. The diner suddenly felt too small, too warm. I looked down at my untouched coffee and noticed my hand trembling slightly against the ceramic mug. Daniel knows about this? I whispered. Pastor Benjamin hesitated long enough to answer the question without words. My throat tightened painfully. There is more, he admitted quietly after another pause. Then he reached inside his leather folder and slid several papers carefully across the table toward me. One of the church board members felt uncomfortable and shared copies with me confidentially. I stared down at the documents without touching them at first. Printed forms, property estimates, real estate evaluations for my home address. My home. One page included handwritten notes discussing market value after renovations and projected sale timelines. Another contained information about local senior living facilities less than 40 miles away. My vision blurred slightly around the edges as I slowly turned the pages. Nicole's handwriting appeared across several margins in neat, elegant script. Once Evelyn transitions, Daniel can manage sale logistics directly. I stopped breathing for a moment after reading that sentence. Transition. As though I were furniture being moved into storage. Pastor Benjamin leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice even further. Evelyn, I do not believe their concern is your well-being. I looked up at him finally. Then what do they want? The pastor glanced briefly toward the diner windows before answering. I think they want your house. I did not cry in the diner. That surprised even me. A younger version of myself probably would have broken apart right there between the chipped coffee cups and laminated menus. But grief changes people in strange ways. By the time you survive losing a husband after 42 years of marriage, humiliation begins to feel quieter somehow. Colder. I simply folded the documents carefully back into their envelope while Pastor Benjamin watched me with tired eyes across the booth. I am sorry, he said softly. I should have come to you sooner. I shook my head once. No, I replied calmly. I think they wanted me shocked. It is harder to manipulate someone who already knows the truth. The pastor looked relieved by my composure, though I could tell he still expected tears eventually. Everyone expects older women to collapse gracefully when their families betray them. They expect trembling voices and confused silence and quiet acceptance. Nicole especially expected that. By the time I drove home that afternoon, something inside me had shifted completely. The fear was still there, but underneath it another feeling had begun taking shape. Clarity. I spent the evening walking slowly through my house room by room, while the late sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors. Thomas installed himself nearly 15 years earlier. The dining room still contained the oak china cabinet my parents gave us as a wedding gift. The upstairs hallway still carried faint pencil marks on the wall where we measured Daniel's height every birthday through high school. This was not simply property. It was evidence of an entire life. And Nicole had already begun discussing its sale like she was flipping through listings in a real estate catalog. Around 7 that evening my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at his name glowing across the screen for several seconds before answering. Hi, Mom, he said cautiously. Nicole and I were thinking maybe we could stop by tomorrow afternoon. I walked slowly into the kitchen while holding the phone against my ear. For what reason? I asked quietly. There was a short pause. We are just worried about you, Daniel replied. After everything lately. Everything lately. Such careful language. Nicole found a really wonderful senior living community about 30 minutes outside town. He continued gently. They have gardening clubs and fitness classes and transportation services. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not even subtle anymore. That sounds lovely, I said softly. Daniel sounded almost surprised by my calm response. You do not have to decide anything right away, he added quickly. We just want to help make things easier for you. Easier. Another polished word hiding uglier intentions beneath it. I looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard swing set, where Sophie's pink plastic sandbox still sat beneath the maple tree. You can come by tomorrow, I told him. I think talking face to face would be best. After we hung up, I remained standing in the dark kitchen for a long time listening to the refrigerator hum softly beside me. Then I walked upstairs to Thomas's old office and unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet Daniel thought I could no longer manage alone. Inside were decades of carefully organized records, mortgage statements, insurance policies, tax returns, property deeds. Thomas believed paperwork should always be precise because people become unpredictable when money enters a family. At the time, I thought he was overly cautious. Now I understood exactly what he meant. Near the back of the drawer sat another folder Daniel did not know existed. Copies of every financial contribution I made toward his college tuition. Records showing the down payment I provided when he and Nicole bought their first home. Receipts for private school tuition for Sophie during the years Daniel's business struggled. I sat at the desk slowly turning page after page while the house settled quietly around me. By midnight, I had created 3 separate folders and placed them neatly across the desk beneath the warm yellow light of Thomas's old reading lamp. One folder contained property records. One contained financial transfers. The third held printed screenshots of Nicole's public social media posts from the past 2 years. I noticed patterns now I had missed before. Phrases about boundaries, difficult relatives, protecting peace. She had been building this narrative carefully for a very long time. Around 1 a.m, I opened my desk drawer and removed the small digital recorder Thomas once used for business meetings. I tested the batteries. The red light blinked on immediately. Then I placed it carefully beside the folders and smiled for the first time since Mother's Day. Daniel and Nicole arrived the following afternoon precisely at 3 o'clock, carrying a bakery box tied with pale pink ribbon and wearing the careful expressions people use before delivering difficult news to someone they already consider fragile. Nicole hugged me lightly at the front door while balancing the pastry box against one hip. We brought lemon squares from Bellamy's Bakery, she said brightly. Your favorite. I thanked her and stepped aside to let them enter. The digital recorder rested quietly beneath a stack of magazines on the end table beside the living room sofa, already switched on before they arrived. Nicole glanced around the house the moment she walked inside. Not openly enough to seem rude, but carefully enough that I noticed. Her eyes lingered on the staircase banister, the antique clock in the hallway, the framed artwork Thomas collected during our anniversary trips over the years. Daniel sat stiffly on the sofa while Nicole arranged the bakery box neatly on the coffee table as though staging a photograph for social media. This house always feels so large, she said casually while smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. I cannot imagine trying to manage all this alone. I sat across from them in Thomas's old armchair with my hands folded calmly in my lap. I have managed it for 37 years, I replied softly. Nicole smiled sympathetically. Of course, but life changes. There was that word again. Changes. Transitions. Boundaries. They never used direct language anymore. Everything came wrapped in soft, polite packaging designed to make cruelty sound compassionate. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom, we just think it might be time to start considering what the next stage looks like. I looked at him carefully. For whom? His expression tightened immediately. Nicole stepped in before he could answer. Evelyn, nobody is trying to push you into anything, she said gently. We are worried because lately you seem overwhelmed. I almost admired how naturally she lied now. Overwhelmed. I repeated quietly. Nicole nodded with practiced concern. You forget things sometimes. You isolate yourself. The church has noticed. The church has noticed. Meaning she had made sure they noticed. Daniel leaned forward slightly with his elbows resting on his knees. Mom, maybe you would actually enjoy a community where people your age spend more time together. People your age. I kept my expression calm even as something cold settled deeper inside me. And what happens to this house? I asked softly. Daniel exchanged the briefest glance with Nicole before answering. Well, eventually selling it would probably make the most financial sense. There it was, finally spoken aloud. Nicole reached over and touched Daniel's hand as though supporting him through an emotional conversation. We could help manage everything, she added smoothly. The paperwork, the real estate process, moving arrangements. You would not have to stress about any of it. I noticed she said we could help manage everything instead of you could decide everything. Tiny differences in language reveal entire intentions. I lowered my eyes briefly and allowed silence to settle over the room long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I sighed softly. Maybe you are right, I said at last. The relief on Daniel's face appeared instantly. Nicole's posture relaxed almost imperceptibly beside him. Really? Daniel asked. I nodded slowly while looking down at my hands. Ever since your father died, things have felt harder. Nicole moved closer across the sofa cushion, her voice becoming almost tender. That is completely normal, Evelyn. Nobody expects you to handle this alone. I nearly smiled at the performance of it all. There is actually a wonderful assisted living community near Fairmont, Nicole continued. They have wellness programs and art classes and beautiful walking paths. She spoke the way real estate agents describe lakefront condominiums. Maybe we could all tour it together next week. I looked toward the living room window where late afternoon sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor in long golden lines. Then I nodded once more. I suppose that would be sensible. Daniel looked visibly lighter after that, almost cheerful. The tension disappeared from his shoulders for the first time since they arrived. Nicole opened the bakery box and placed lemon squares onto dessert plates while discussing furniture downsizing and simplified living arrangements as casually as someone planning a family vacation. All the while the recorder captured every word quietly from beneath the magazines. At one point Nicole laughed softly and said something that stayed with me long after they left. Honestly, once all the stress of maintaining this place is gone, you might finally become yourself again. Become myself again. As though the woman sitting in front of her had already disappeared. Over the next week, I became exactly the version of me Nicole wanted the world to see. I let small silences linger during conversations. I pretended to forget the name of a restaurant Daniel mentioned twice. When Nicole called to discuss touring the assisted living facility, I acted hesitant and emotionally tired instead of suspicious. The more uncertain I appeared, the more confident they became. That was the strange thing about manipulation. Once people believe they are winning, they stop hiding themselves carefully. Nicole especially began relaxing around me in ways she never had before. By Thursday evening, she was already discussing timelines openly, while sitting at my kitchen table drinking herbal tea from one of my porcelain cups. The market is excellent right now, she explained while scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. Houses in your neighborhood are selling within days. Your neighborhood, not our family home, not the place where Daniel grew up. Her language had already separated me from it emotionally. Daniel sat beside her reviewing something on his tablet while barely participating in the conversation. Every now and then he nodded quietly whenever Nicole mentioned renovations or property values. I wondered if he realized how much he had started sounding like her. You could keep a few sentimental items for your apartment, Nicole suggested kindly. Maybe some framed photos and smaller furniture pieces. Apartment. The word echoed through me, like cold wind moving through an empty church. This woman was slowly reducing an entire human life into storage categories. I suppose I do not need all this space anymore, I murmured softly while folding a dish towel near the sink. Nicole smiled with visible satisfaction. Exactly. Simplifying can be freeing. At that moment, Sophie entered through the back door carrying her backpack and violin case after orchestra practice. She stopped immediately when she noticed the real estate brochures spread across my kitchen table. What is all this? She asked. Nicole answered before anyone else could speak. We are helping Grandma think about moving somewhere easier for her. Sophie looked confused. Moving where? Someplace safer, Nicole replied smoothly. With people who can help take care of her. Sophie frowned and looked toward me instead of her parents. But Grandma takes care of everybody else. The room became strangely quiet after that. Nicole's smile tightened slightly around the edges while Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Children say honest things adults spend years trying to avoid. Things change, sweetheart, Nicole said lightly. Sophie glanced at the brochures again before quietly going upstairs to wash her hands for dinner. Nicole waited until she disappeared completely before exhaling softly. She gets attached very easily, she said. Transitions will be emotional for her. I noticed then that Nicole had already begun speaking about my removal from the house as though the decision had been finalized somewhere without me present. Later that evening, after dinner dishes were cleared and Sophie sat upstairs doing homework, Nicole asked Daniel to help bring several empty storage boxes in from their SUV. The moment they stepped outside through the garage door, Sophie appeared silently at the kitchen entrance. "Grandma," she whispered nervously. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded gently. She lowered her voice further. "Are Mom and Dad making you leave?" The question hit harder than I expected. I forced myself to remain calm. "Why would you ask that?" Sophie twisted the sleeve of her sweatshirt anxiously. "Because I heard Mom talking on the phone yesterday." My heartbeat slowed instantly. "Talking to who?" Sophie shook her head. "I do not know. But she said once you were gone they could finally renovate the upstairs and sell the house for way more money." The kitchen suddenly felt completely still around us. Sophie swallowed hard before continuing. "She also said you were too emotional to notice what was happening." For several seconds I could not speak. Not because I was shocked anymore. That feeling had already passed days ago. No, what I felt now was something far quieter. Confirmation. Sophie looked frightened after realizing what she had revealed. "Please do not tell Mom I said anything," she whispered quickly. I reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "I will not," I promised softly. At that exact moment, the garage door opened again, and Daniel's voice echoed down the hallway, carrying another stack of empty, moving boxes into the house. 3 days later, Nicole organized what she called a family planning brunch at the church fellowship hall after Sunday service. She framed it as a loving gathering focused on supporting me through my next chapter. Even the phrase sounded rehearsed. Long white tablecloths covered the folding tables beneath soft yellow lights, while members of the women's committee arranged pastries and fruit trays near the coffee station. Nicole moved through the room, greeting people gracefully in a pale blue dress with a silver cross necklace resting against her collarbone. To anyone watching from a distance, she looked like the perfect daughter-in-law. Compassionate, patient, selfless. Daniel stood beside her speaking quietly with several church elders while Sophie remained unusually silent near the back wall, holding a paper cup of orange juice with both hands. Pastor Benjamin arrived 10 minutes late and nodded subtly toward me the moment he entered the room. He already knew what I planned to do. Nicole eventually tapped a spoon gently against her glass to gather everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming," she began warmly. "Family means supporting each other through life's transitions, especially when aging parents need extra care and guidance." Several people smiled sympathetically in my direction. Nicole placed one hand dramatically against her chest before continuing. "Daniel and I have spent months worrying about Evelyn living alone in that large house after Thomas passed away. We only want peace and safety for her." Peace and safety. The same carefully polished words she always used when disguising cruelty as kindness. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly beside her, but said nothing. Nicole continued speaking about community support, emotional health, and difficult decisions families sometimes must make for loved ones who can no longer manage independently. Then she smiled softly toward me. "We are hoping Evelyn will soon transition into a wonderful assisted living community where professionals can help her thrive." Thrive. Another beautiful word hiding an ugly intention underneath it. I sat quietly through the entire speech with my hands folded neatly in my lap, while several women from church watched me with expressions balanced somewhere between pity and discomfort. Nicole finally turned toward me directly. "Evelyn, would you like to say anything?" she asked sweetly. The room became silent. Even the coffee cups stopped clinking. Slowly, I stood from my chair. "Actually," I said calmly, "I would." Nicole smiled confidently and stepped aside from the microphone. She still believed she controlled the room. I looked first toward Pastor Benjamin standing near the doorway, then towards Sophie sitting frozen beside the wall. Finally, I looked at Daniel. My son could not hold eye contact with me for more than 2 seconds. I have spent the last several weeks listening carefully, I began softly. Listening to conversations about my health, my memory, my emotional state, and apparently my inability to manage the home I have maintained for nearly 4 decades. Uneasy movement spread quietly through the fellowship hall. Nicole's smile faded slightly around the edges. At first I wondered if perhaps grief had changed me more than I realized. I continued. But then I started paying attention to the difference between concern and strategy. Nicole stepped forward immediately. Evelyn, nobody is attacking you. I raised one hand. Gently. Please do not interrupt me, Nicole. You have spoken quite enough lately. The room became completely still after that. I reached calmly into my handbag and removed the small digital recorder. Daniel's face changed instantly. Over the past week, I said quietly, I recorded several private conversations because I wanted to make certain my memory was still functioning properly. Nicole went pale so quickly it almost startled me. Before either of them could react, Pastor Benjamin walked forward carrying a portable speaker from the church media cabinet. I connected the recorder calmly while dozens of church members watched in stunned silence. Then Nicole's own voice filled the fellowship hall clearly through the speakers. Once all the stress of maintaining this place is gone, you might finally become yourself again. Another recording followed immediately afterward. The market is excellent right now. Houses in your neighborhood are selling within days. Then another. She is too emotional to notice what is happening. Several people gasped softly. One elderly woman lowered her eyes into her lap, while another church elder stared openly at Daniel in disbelief. Nicole stepped backward, so quickly her chair nearly tipped behind her. This is completely out of context, she whispered shakily. But the damage was already done. Because for the first time since Mother's Day, everyone in that room finally stopped seeing me as a burden. They saw exactly who she was instead.